I've been driving the night shift for nearly 5 years now. The hours are long, but the route is simple, and the passengers are usually harmless. Most nights, it's a revolving door of exhausted commuters, the occasional night owl, or kids trying to get home after a late shift. Nothing out of the ordinary. But this one night, was different. It started like any other. The bus hummed quietly beneath me, the headlights cutting through the dark suburban streets. The stops were familiar, the route automatic. I barely had to think anymore, my hands guiding the wheel as if on instinct. The bus was mostly empty, with just a few regulars scattered across the seats. I noticed him first about a week ago. He'd gotten on late, sitting near the back, his face hidden beneath the dim glow of the overhead lights. Middle-aged, nondescript. He didn't stand out at first, just another guy riding the bus. But then I saw him again the next night. Same seat, same empty stare directed out the window. Nothing weird about that. People are creatures of habit, and plenty of my regulars pick the same seat every night. But something about him felt off. It wasn't until the third night that I noticed his pattern. He would get on after a woman had boarded, wait until she got off at some remote stop, then follow. He'd never get off at the same stop, always 1 or 2 stops down the line. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured he lived nearby or had some late-night job like me. But then, I started seeing him more often, and it was always the same. It's easy to second-guess yourself when you're stuck in your own head for hours on end. You start to overthink things, question what you've seen, wonder if you're just being paranoid. I did that a lot. He's just another passenger, I told myself. You're tired, you're imagining things. But the knot in my stomach tightened each time I saw him, and no amount of self-reassurance could shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, it all came to a head. I was halfway through my route when she got on, a young woman in her late 20s, maybe early 30s. She looked like she'd just gotten off a long shift, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She sat near the front, pulling her jacket tighter around herself like she was trying to disappear. I barely noticed her at first. What I did notice was him. He was already on the bus, sitting in his usual spot at the back. I didn't see him get on this time, which was strange. I usually kept an eye on the passengers, especially the late-night ones. But there he was, staring straight ahead, expressionless. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to focus on driving, but my eyes kept drifting to the rearview mirror, watching him watch her. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, silent and still. But his presence felt wrong, like he didn't belong. As we approached her stop, a quiet, isolated street with barely any streetlights, I found myself gripping the wheel a little tighter. She stood up, making her way to the front, and I opened the doors for her. She stepped off into the night without a second glance. I watched as she disappeared into the shadows, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. And then I saw him. He pulled the cord, signaling his stop. It was the next one, just like always. My heart started pounding in my chest. This wasn't a coincidence, he was following her again. I don't know what came over me, but something inside snapped. I couldn't let him do it again. I couldn't let this happen. My hands were shaking as I closed the doors and pulled away from her stop. My mind raced. What could I do? Should I call someone? Was I overreacting? I kept glancing in the mirror, watching him as he stood up, moving toward the front. The bus stopped, and the doors opened. He stepped off, his movements slow, deliberate. I watched him in the side mirror as he turned, heading in the same direction she had gone. He was following her. Again. Without thinking, I slammed the bus into park and jumped out. The cold night air hit me like a wall, but I barely noticed. My feet pounded the pavement as I ran after him, my heart racing. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't sit back and watch. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing down the empty street. He didn't stop, didn't even look back. I ran faster, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "What do you think you're doing?" This time, he stopped. Slowly, he turned to face me, his expression calm, almost bored. He didn't say anything, just stared at me like he was sizing me up. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe for him to run, maybe to deny it. But the way he looked at me sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't scared, he wasn't even surprised. It was like he had been waiting for this. "I asked you a question," I said, my voice shaking. "What are you doing?" He shrugged, the slightest hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just walking." I wanted to scream, to grab him, to do something, but I was frozen in place. I couldn't prove anything. He hadn't touched her, hadn't said a word to her. But I knew what he was, I could see it in his eyes. He was a predator, and I had interrupted his hunt. Behind me, I heard footsteps, quick, hurried. The woman appeared out of the darkness, her face pale, eyes wide with confusion. She looked between me and the man, clearly not understanding what was happening. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. I glanced back at him, but he was already turning away, slipping into the shadows like he had never been there at all. I wanted to go after him, but something told me it was over. For tonight, at least. I walked her back to the bus, my heart still pounding, my mind racing. She kept asking me what was going on, but I didn't know how to explain it. What was I supposed to say? That a man had been stalking her, following her for nights, waiting for the right moment? That I'd been too scared to do anything until now. When I finally dropped her off at her real stop, one with streetlights and people around, I drove the rest of the route in silence. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see him again, sitting in the back, watching. But he was gone. As I parked the bus at the depot and stepped off into the cold night, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. He'd be back. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but I knew I hadn't seen the last of him. I'd been lucky this time, but what if I hadn't been there? What if I hadn't noticed? What if next time he found someone when there was no one to stop him?